I was welding a broken hinge on my barn door when I saw the pearl-white SUV creeping down my gravel driveway. It was spotless, like it had never seen a dirt road in its life. The second I spotted the oversized sunglasses and tight bun behind the wheel, my gut clenched. "Here we go again," I muttered. Out stepped Marlene. Marlene Dovers, the self-appointed queen of the Greystone Ridge HOA. She was in her 50s, wore pastel-colored cardigans like armor, and had a voice that could chip paint off a fence post. Right behind her were two guys in matching navy blue polos with HOA enforcement stitched on the chest like they were part of some official task force. Spoiler, they weren't. I set my welding torch down and pulled off my gloves. "Marlene, what brings you to my end of the neighborhood?" "We all out of bushes to measure." She adjusted her sunglasses and pointed at the barn behind me. "We've had complaints." "From who?" she sniffed. "That's confidential." I folded my arms. And what kind of complaints?" She gestured toward the barn like it offended her entire bloodline. "You're running a commercial operation in there. Violates Section 9, Article 3 of the HOA guidelines." I laughed. "It's a barn for tools and feed." "This is still technically zoned agricultural, Marlene. You signed the same paperwork I did when you moved in." Her eye twitched. "We're revisiting those zoning exceptions. In the meantime, I have the right to inspect the premises." "No, you don't." That's when the two HOA cops stepped forward. One of them, a doughy guy with a clipboard and a power trip, said, "We can enter and inspect any suspected violations." I shook my head. "That's trespassing. You don't have a warrant and this isn't HOA property." "You step into that barn, I'll have Sheriff Wilkes out here before your loafers touch the floor." Marlene's lips curled like she smelled something bad. "We'll see about that." They backed off for now. That night my sons came home. Both had served overseas, both now worked in private security, and both were built like they could bench press a truck. Marlene and Barrett. They were staying with me for a few weeks while on leave. I didn't mention the Marlene drama, figured it wasn't worth it. Turns out I was wrong. The next afternoon, I was at the feed store picking up supplies. Marlene called me from the house phone. "Dad," he said, "some people tried breaking into the barn." "What? They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. Just started trying to pry the side door open. You call the sheriff?" "Already on it. They're on the way, but we might have scared them a bit." I floored it back home. When I pulled into the driveway, there they were, Marlene and her two goons sitting on the ground, red in the face, looking like they'd seen ghosts. One had what looked like a broom handle duct taped to his polo like some kind of fake baton. My sons stood just inside the barn, arms crossed, calm as ever. Marlene pointed at them, shrieking. "They threatened us. They're dangerous." Barrett stepped forward. "Ma'am, we told you 3 times to leave the property. You ignored warnings and tried to pry open a locked structure." Marlene added, "We've got it all on camera, audio too. Including you saying I don't care what the law says, we make the rules here. That's not a great look." Just then, Sheriff Wilkes pulled in. He glanced at me, then at the mess in front of him. Marlene jumped up. "Arrest them, they threatened me." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Who exactly broke the lock?" One of the HOA guys, suddenly a lot less bold, mumbled. "She told us to." Sheriff Wilkes turned to Marlene. "You know this is private property, right?" Marlene tried to recover. "We were enforcing HOA regulations." Wilkes shook his head. "You're not law enforcement, and you just committed breaking and entering. That's a felony." Her face drained of color. "You can't be serious." He pulled out his notepad. "Dead serious. Turn around, Marlene." When the cuffs clicked shut, I stood beside my sons, arms crossed, watching the queen of the HOA get walked to the back of a cruiser. Marlene leaned over and said, "Think she'll still want that barn inspection?" I chuckled. "Let her request it from the holding cell." 3 days later, the dust hadn't settled, it had thickened. Sheriff Wilkes had filed charges against Marlene and her 2 enforcers, but the HOA board circled the wagons like their lives depended on it. They released a statement, typed in all caps and Comic Sans, accusing me of harboring violent individuals and obstructing community governance. It ended with a line that made Nolan laugh so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "We will not be intimidated by unlawful barns or paramilitary intimidation tactics." I called my attorney, Celeste, a no-nonsense woman who once dismantled a zoning board so thoroughly they voluntarily dissolved. She took one look at the HOA's public statement and said, "They're digging their own grave. Get me the original charter and any amendments they've made in the last 5 years." While she worked on the legal end, I paid a visit to the county records office. I'd never had a reason to dig into HOA filings before most folks didn't, but what I found made my stomach turn. The HOA had quietly filed a jurisdiction expansion petition 2 months ago. They were trying to reclassify properties like mine long grandfathered in under agricultural zoning as full HOA-controlled lots. But here's the kicker. The county hadn't approved it. The petition was still under review, flagged for procedural issues. Yet Marlene and her crew had already started enforcing it like it was law. When I brought the paperwork home that evening, Barrett was cleaning the carburetor on my old ATV. He squinted at the forms. "They tried to annex your property without approval?" "No," I said, holding up the flagged notice. "They pretended it was already approved." He set the tool down. "That's fraud." Nolan, reading from the second page, added, "And if they filed any fines based on this fake status, that's racketeering." That night, Celeste called and confirmed what we'd suspected. They've been issuing violation letters to 5 other properties on that same fake jurisdiction. I'm filing a cease and desist in the morning and notifying the state attorney general. The next morning, I drove down to the community clubhouse. The HOA board was having one of their early bird meetings, the kind where they whisper like it's a Cold War spy drop. I didn't wait to be invited in. The room went quiet when I stepped through the door. 5 board members sat at a long plastic table, each with matching mugs that said Greystone Ridge Excellence in order. Marlene's seat was empty, a small folded sign marked "On leave pending review." Tammy, the treasurer, cleared her throat. "This is a private meeting, Mr. Rand." I set the stack of county records on the table. "Then you won't mind if I record it. See, I'm here as a property owner whose land you tried to steal through paperwork." Greg, the vice president, leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation." "Not an accusation," I said. "A fact. You tried to reclassify my land without approval, then used that fake authority to break into my barn. That's fraud and conspiracy. And depending on how you collected those fines, possibly embezzlement." Tammy's face turned the color of a bruised plum. "We were under the impression the expansion had already gone through." "Really?" I held up a printed email from the county's zoning office. "Because this says you were told explicitly that it hadn't." 2 weeks before the break-in. There was a long pause, the kind where you can hear everyone trying not to look guilty at once. I continued, "You're going to rescind every fine, withdraw every notice, and write a letter admitting that you acted outside your authority. Or my next visit will be with a civil investigator and a news crew." Greg tried to keep his composure. "We'll need time to review. I'm not negotiating," I said. "You've got 48 hours. Outside the clubhouse, I found a small crowd waiting. Turns out, word had spread about Marlene's arrest, and people wanted answers. Most of them I didn't know by name, just faces from the occasional community BBQ or mailbox run. A woman with silver hair and gardening gloves still on grabbed my elbow. "Is it true they tried to classify our homes under stricter rules?" "They did," I said, "but they didn't have the legal authority." A few people gasped. Someone muttered, "That's theft." By sunset, I had 15 signed statements from neighbors who'd received similar notices or threats from the HOA. One man, a retired trucker named Ed, brought out a letter dated 6 weeks earlier where the HOA had demanded he remove his backyard greenhouse or face fines under the new jurisdictional code. The code didn't exist. Celeste added it to the growing stack of evidence. The state got involved 2 days later. An investigator from the Attorney General's office arrived unannounced at the HOA's next meeting. The board froze like deer in a spotlight. The investigator, a tall, quiet man with a badge that read Fraud Division, asked for documents. They stalled. He served a subpoena. Meanwhile, I helped organize a town hall at the community center. We packed the place. People who hadn't spoken to their neighbors in years were suddenly sharing stories about threats, forged signatures, and unexplained fees. Celeste stood at the front and explained how the HOA had violated its own bylaws by operating outside its approved charter. They acted like a private government, she said. But they're just a nonprofit with paperwork, and they've broken the law. The vote to dissolve the current board was unanimous. Greg resigned first. Tammy followed. The other two tried to stall, but after the AG's office froze the HOA's accounts pending investigation, they didn't have much reason to stick around. Even Marlene's name was removed from all official records when her arraignment date was finalized. In the weeks that followed, we formed a new interim council, just volunteers from the neighborhood. No titles, no salaries, just people who wanted to fix the mess. I didn't run for anything. I just went back to fixing up my barn and letting my sons enjoy their time off in peace. One evening, Marlene and Barrett grilled steaks in the backyard while I replaced a hinge on the chicken coop. The sun was low, the air smelled like mesquite and fresh-cut grass. "You think it's over?" Marlene asked, flipping a steak. "For now," I said. "But if it isn't, we'll deal with it," Barrett chuckled. "Next time they try to storm the barn, maybe put up a Beware of Veterans sign," I laughed. "Nah, let him guess." And just like that, Greystone Ridge started to feel like a neighborhood again, less about control, more about community. Which is exactly how it always should have been. It was about 3 weeks after the board resigned when I got a call from Deputy Rachel Kemp. She didn't mince words. "You got a minute? Something's come up. It's about the HOA bank records." I grabbed my keys without asking questions. She met me at the sheriff's substation just outside town, papers spread across a desk like a bad poker hand. She tapped one with a pink highlighter. "This withdrawal here, $32,000, supposedly for landscaping upgrades on the south end of Greystone Ridge." I leaned closer. "There's no landscaping on the south end. That's just the retention pond and a dirt path." "Exactly," she said. "And this one? 21,000 marked as security enhancements, no invoices, no contractor signatures. Just a check made out to a consulting firm that doesn't exist anywhere in the state registry." "They were laundering money," I said. She nodded. "Looks that way, and we've got matching entries going back over a year." Quiet, small withdrawals at first, then bigger ones once they thought no one was watching. I clenched my jaw. "Where's the money now?" She handed me another sheet. "We traced portions of it to a private account belonging to Marlene Dovers, but here's the twist, there's a second account. Under a name we didn't recognize at first." "Who?" Craig Toland. "He was listed as an independent contractor for site inspections." "Marlene's cousin," I said. "She used to drag him to community events, said he was a compliance expert or something." Rachel flipped over the sheet. "He's not certified in anything. What he is, though, is a convicted fraudster. Did 18 months in Louisiana for impersonating a municipal inspector. That explained the matching polos and the clipboard swagger." Rachel continued, "We've got enough for a financial crimes indictment. But the DA wants to go bigger. If it turns out they falsified regulatory documents to push that fake zoning expansion, we're talking about multiple felonies, fraud, conspiracy, and potentially wire fraud if they used HOA emails to distribute threats." I exhaled. "They're going after the whole board. Every last one," she said. "Even the ones who resigned quietly. If they signed off on any of these expenses, they're in." The next morning, Marlene and Barrett helped me install a new gate at the front of the driveway. We used steel posts set 3 feet deep in concrete with a locking mechanism that could stop a truck. Not for show, just caution. People like Marlene don't go down easy, and I didn't trust that she didn't have other friends still lurking around. That afternoon, Celeste came by with a stack of affidavits. We've got 22 households joining the civil suit. That's enough to seek punitive damages." "Good," I said. "They deserve it." She looked over at Barrett, who was adjusting the tension on the gate's hinges. "You boys planning to stay much longer?" Barrett wiped his hands on a towel. "As long as Dad needs," Celeste nodded. "Smart. Things might get noisy." She wasn't wrong. 2 days later, the county issued arrest warrants for 3 more former HOA board members. One tried to claim it was all Marlene's doing. Another said she wasn't aware the contractor was fake. The third just kept repeating, "I thought it was legal," like that was some kind of spell that could undo felony charges. Meanwhile, Craig Toland vanished. The sheriff's office put out a bulletin, but he'd already cleared out his last known address and left behind a stack of unopened mail and an empty beer fridge. Rachel thought he might have slipped across state lines. We installed 2 more trail cams at the edge of the woods behind the property. Not because we expected trouble, but because people who steal that much money don't usually go quietly. Marlene caught footage of a black sedan idling near the far fence line just after 2 a.m. the following night. No plates, engine running, lights off. Barrett caught it again the next night, same time. We sent the footage to the sheriff and Rachel confirmed it wasn't a local vehicle. Likely a rental, used under false credentials. That's when the U.S. Postal Inspector got involved. Apparently, one of the fake invoices used a P.O. box to receive compliance documentation. That P.O. box was registered under Marlene's name, but the forwarding address linked to a commercial mail drop in another county used in past federal fraud cases. This wasn't just a couple of HOA goons getting greedy. This was a coordinated financial scheme, layered and hidden behind a facade of neighborhood rules and petty enforcement, and it all started with trying to break into a barn. By the end of the week, federal charges were filed. Mail fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Marlene was moved to county holding under federal custody. She tried to call a press conference from jail, but no media outlet ran the footage. Too many other scandals in the city that week. The neighborhood, meanwhile, was waking up. The new volunteer council cleaned house. They canceled all automatic dues withdrawals until a full audit could be completed. They opened every financial record for public inspection. And at the next community meeting, held in the old recreation hall that had been padlocked for nearly a year, the turnout was standing room only. People brought food. Kids played tag on the lawn. I stood near the back, arms crossed, watching neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact now comparing notes on bylaws and budget reviews. One man, a former contractor, offered to repair the community fence for free. Another offered to teach a weekly budgeting class so the new council could manage funds transparently. Barrett leaned in. "You think they've learned their lesson?" "No," I said, "but they're learning how to pay attention." 2 days later, Rachel called again. "We found Craig." "Where?" "Abandoned shop outside Pascagoula, Mississippi. He was squatting in a back room, had a burner phone, 2 fake IDs, and a laptop full of financial records. Looks like he was trying to recreate the scheme in another HOA across state lines. They're charging him federally. Every agency with an acronym wants a piece of him." I hung up and looked outside. Marlene was teaching a kid from next door how to use a wrench properly. Barrett was stacking lumber for the new shed extension. The gate was locked. The cameras were up. The barn was quiet. I walked over to the porch and sat down with a cup of coffee as the sun dropped behind the pines. The storm had passed, but the cleanup would take time. Still, it was worth it. Because when people think they can take what they want under the cover of rules and procedure, sometimes all it takes is a locked barn, a little vigilance, and a couple of military sons to remind them just how wrong they are. And this time, they weren't getting back up. It was early April by the time the final hearings were scheduled. The air had shifted, less tension, more anticipation. The community rumor mill had gone quiet, replaced by hushed planning sessions and check-ins from neighbors who used to pretend not to know each other's names. Celeste was still coordinating the civil case, but what really had people talking was the federal prosecution. Barrett and Marlene were replacing the busted floodlight on the east side of the barn when a dark gray government SUV rolled up the driveway. It wasn't Sheriff Wilkes this time. A woman in a navy suit stepped out, heels crunching the gravel with purpose. "Mr. Rand," she asked, holding her badge just long enough for me to read Federal Investigations Unit Financial Crimes Division. I nodded. "That's me. Special Agent Palmer. I need to speak with you about a recent development. May we talk inside?" I led her to the kitchen. She declined coffee but accepted a glass of water, setting a thick manila folder on the table like it weighed more than it should. "We've completed the forensic audit on the HOA's accounts," she said. "There's more than we expected." "How much more?" She flipped the folder open. "In the last 3 years, over $300,000 siphoned through fabricated service contracts, inflated maintenance fees, and forged reimbursements. Most of it cycled through shell companies tied to Marlene Dovers and Craig Toland." But she paused, tapping a page. "There's now evidence at least one board member used HOA funds to pay for private legal retainers and a down payment on a second home." I leaned forward. "You have proof of that?" "We do. Wire transfers, fake invoices, and notarized paperwork. Some of the signatures were forged. One belonged to a deceased board member." I blinked. "You're saying they were using dead people to authorize financial moves?" "Correct. We've confirmed that at least 2 financial documents submitted to the county zoning committee were signed using names of individuals who had passed away months prior. That elevated this from financial fraud to document tampering and identity misuse." Barrett appeared in the doorway, arms folded. "So they're going to prison, right?" Palmer nodded. "Federal prison, multiple counts. But there's one more thing." She turned the page and slid a photograph across the table. It was grainy, taken from surveillance footage, but unmistakable. A familiar figure, blurred but clearly Marlene, standing at a self-service kiosk in a bank lobby in another state. The timestamp was from 2 weeks after her arrest. "But she's in custody," I said. Palmer's voice dropped. "She was, for 72 hours. Then her attorney filed a medical motion for temporary house arrest due to a heart condition. She was released to her residence under electronic monitoring." Marlene walked in, wiping grease off his hands. "You're telling us she was loose while the rest of the neighborhood thought she was locked up?" "She cut her ankle monitor within 24 hours, Palmer said, "and disappeared. We believe she's being sheltered by a relative out of state." "Possibly under a false identity again." Barrett shook his head. "Unreal. She's now a fugitive," Palmer said, "and there's a federal warrant for harboring her. If anyone hears from her or sees her, they're to contact our office immediately." I stood. "You think she'd come back here?" Palmer didn't answer immediately. Then she said she might, not for the HOA, but if she left anything incriminating behind documents, backups, she'd want to retrieve them before trial. After she left, we didn't waste time. Marlene installed motion sensors along the tree line, and Barrett adjusted the trail cams to cover blind spots. We already had everything backed up to off-site drives, but I dug out the old fireproof lockbox from the attic and moved the physical files to a secure deposit box in town. 3 nights later, around 2 in the morning, the barn alarm tripped. Marlene was out the door before I even reached for my boots. Barrett had the shotgun, but he held it low, barrel pointed at the ground just in case. We reached the barn's side door. The lock was intact, but the sensor had picked up movement along the back wall. Marlene swept the area with a flashlight. Nothing. Then he spotted a small plastic wedge jammed into the bottom of the siding, just enough to hold it open without triggering the magnetic seal. Barrett gritted his teeth. "Someone tried to slip something through." We found it wedged inside the wall cavity. A flash drive, wrapped in plastic and duct tape. No markings, no label. I handed it over to Celeste the next morning. She brought it to the investigator's office, and within 48 hours, we had confirmation it was Marlene's insurance policy. Or what she thought was one. The drive contained audio recordings of board meetings covert, poorly recorded, but clear enough to catch voices. In one, Marlene laughed about the ghost signatures they used to push the jurisdiction petition. In another, she mentioned bribing a code inspector to look the other way on a zoning submission that never existed. More damning, there were 2 videos poorly lit, cell phone footage of her and Craig counting cash in what looked like her garage. The stacks weren't small. And the date stamp placed it days after the HOA had collected emergency assessments from residents for a supposed infrastructure repair that had never materialized. The footage was enough to secure a second round of indictments. The assistant DA met with us privately and assured us these new charges would eliminate any possibility of early release or reduced sentences. "Your testimony will be formal," he told me. But the real nail in the coffin is that drive. The trial was held 3 counties over to avoid local influence. The courtroom was packed. News vans lined the street. I testified for over an hour. Barrett and Nolan both answered questions about the night of the break-in, the attempted forced entry, and the unauthorized search. The jury didn't take long. Verdict: guilty on all counts for every board member present. Sentencing ranged from 6 to 20 years, depending on involvement. Marlene, still missing, was sentenced in absentia to 25 years without parole, pending capture. The HOA itself was disbanded by court order. Its remaining funds after restitution were redistributed to affected residents. A trust was formed to manage any future neighborhood needs, overseen by a rotating group of community volunteers under county supervision. On the night the verdicts came down, we hosted a cookout in the field behind the barn. No speeches, no grandstanding. Just good food, neighbors who finally knew each other's names, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing justice had caught up to arrogance. As the sun dipped below the tree line, Nolan leaned against the barn and said, "You ever think it'd go this far?" "No," I said. "But I'm glad we didn't back down." Barrett raised a glass. "To the barn." We all laughed. The cameras stayed up. The gates stayed locked. And in the end, the barn didn't just hold tools and feed, it held the line.